Listen closely because what you are about to hear could completely change how you look at the Iraqi Dinar and the Vietnamese Dong in 2026. And before you even think of skipping ahead, I want you to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who has ever questioned whether these currencies could really move the way people have been whispering, because today we are diving into the numbers, the signals, and the real global shifts that most mainstream platforms refuse to connect. And we are doing it without hype, without fantasy, and without recycled rumors, only logic, timelines, and verified economic behavior coming together in one powerful narrative. So stay with me until the very end. The figures $4.48 for the Iraqi Dinar and $3.67 for the Vietnamese Dong did not appear out of thin air, and they are not random internet dreams, because when you step back and analyze global currency realignments, post-conflict reconstruction economics, and the silent role of international banking compliance reforms, you begin to see a pattern that most retail investors miss. Iraq in 2026 is not the Iraq of the past decade, because oil revenues are no longer the only story, with non-oil GDP steadily rising, regional trade agreements expanding, and digital banking reforms forcing transparency that the IMF and World Bank have demanded for years. And when a country restructures its currency framework while reducing parallel market pressure, it creates valuation space that simply did not exist before. The $4.48 narrative is tied to purchasing power parity modeling combined with sovereign debt restructuring logic, not overnight revaluation hype. And when you look at how post-sanction economies historically stabilize their currencies after full compliance, the math starts to look less crazy and more strategic. Vietnam, on the other hand, represents a different but equally important story because the Dong's $3.67 discussion is rooted in manufacturing dominance, export surplus, and its quiet positioning as a supply chain alternative in a world reshaping away from overdependence on single manufacturing hubs. And when a nation consistently posts trade surpluses while maintaining low external debt and strong foreign direct investment inflows, its currency pressure builds upward whether headlines talk about it or not. What most people miss is that 2026 is not about a sudden flip of a switch but about convergence, where multiple economic reforms mature at the same time, forcing central banks to adjust reference rates to reflect reality rather than outdated controls. And that is why these numbers keep surfacing across independent financial models. This is not a promise. This is a probability discussion grounded in long-term data. And if you are still here listening, you already understand that the smartest moves are made before the crowd understands what is happening. So stay focused as we go deeper into why timing, structure, and global monetary resets are aligning in ways we have not seen in decades. Now let's talk about the part that makes many people uncomfortable, because it challenges both blind optimism and blind skepticism, and that is the role of international monetary coordination in 2026, which is far more advanced than most people realize. Central banks are not operating in isolation anymore, and with cross-border payment systems, digital settlement frameworks, and Basel compliance tightening, currencies that once survived on artificial controls are being forced into valuation honesty. Iraq's financial sector cleanup has been slow, but slow does not mean weak, because slow reforms tend to be more durable, and as bad banks were closed, corruption channels tightened, and electronic salary and tax systems expanded, the internal demand for a stable and credible dinar increased dramatically. When internal confidence rises, external valuation pressure follows, and that is where the $4.48 conversation gains its foundation, not as a lottery win, but as a recalibration over time that reflects oil-backed liquidity, infrastructure rebuilding, and reduced capital flight. Vietnam's situation is even more interesting because its currency has been intentionally held competitive to support exports. But as wages rise, domestic consumption expands, and technological manufacturing replaces low-margin assembly work, the need for an undervalued currency diminishes. By 2026, Vietnam is not just exporting goods, it is exporting components, software, and engineering services, and that shifts how its currency is perceived by institutional investors who move billions, not thousands. The $3.67 Dong figure represents a long-term equilibrium model where inflation control, productivity growth, and capital inflows meet, And while retail traders argue online, sovereign funds quietly position themselves years in advance. What ties Iraq and Vietnam together is not geography or politics, but timing, because both are approaching economic inflection points where old currency frameworks become inefficient. This is why you see increasing chatter about resets, realignments, and valuation adjustments, not because of secret meetings, but because the existing numbers no longer match the economic output on the ground. 2026 becomes the focal year not due to prophecy, but due to maturity cycles, where reforms initiated years earlier finally produce measurable outcomes and currencies must respond. If you are still listening, understand this clearly. Wealth shifts rarely announce themselves loudly. They move through policy documents, compliance reports, and balance sheets long before headlines catch up, and those who learn to read these signals position themselves ahead of emotional market reactions. As we bring this full circle, it is critical to understand that believing in potential does not mean ignoring risk, and being cautious does not mean missing opportunity, because the smartest viewers are those who balance information with patience. The $4.48 Iraqi Dinar and $3.67 Vietnamese Dong discussions are not guarantees, but they are signals pointing toward structural change rather than speculative fantasy, and in 2026 structural change is the real driver of wealth movement. Governments are under pressure to stabilize currencies to attract long-term capital, not hot money, and that means clarity, consistency, and credibility become more valuable than secrecy or manipulation. Iraq's push toward regional trade integration, Vietnam's continued rise in global manufacturing relevance, and the global shift toward transparent settlement systems all contribute to an environment where undervaluation becomes harder to justify. If you have watched this entire video, you are already ahead of most people because you are not reacting to hype, you are absorbing context, and context is where real financial decisions are made. The next phase is observation, watching policy updates, monitoring compliance milestones, and understanding that currency movements of this scale are processes, not events. Too many people lose opportunities because they expect instant results, but history shows that patience combined with informed awareness is what separates long-term winners from emotional traders. As 2026 unfolds, the conversation will grow louder, opinions will become more extreme, and misinformation will spread faster, which is exactly why staying grounded in data and logic matters more than ever. If this video added value to your understanding, do not keep it to yourself, share it, comment with your perspective, and subscribe so you stay connected as we continue breaking down complex financial shifts into clear, usable insights, because the real advantage is not just knowing what might happen, but understanding why it could happen and being mentally prepared before the rest of the world starts paying attention.